We're going to be talking about Ubisoft, and I want to preface this by saying that this is a multifaceted story. Okay, there's multiple different layers to this story that ultimately leads to the felting of Ubisoft and their failure as a company and the choices that they've made over the last few years that have resulted in an ungodly amount of money being lost. Okay, but we're going to start off with what they're trying to pass off as good news, and then try to have an understanding as to what this actually means. Because Ubisoft has a bit of a track record. And people that tend to ignore Ubisoft's track record are usually the ones that are, in their good graces, or, Ubisoft is in their pocket or whatever. So I saw this article and it says Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced is ranking amongst the best titles in the franchise for pre-orders, according to Ubisoft. And they're expecting that it will be a really successful entry. Now, here's the thing. I want to start off by saying this. I don't think that Black Flag is going to fail whatsoever. Okay, I just don't. But what I do think is that Ubisoft is overselling exactly what's happening here. Why do I think that? Well, that's because Ubisoft has done this multiple times in the past. I'll give you an example. Assassin's Creed Shadows, a video game that had 25 trillion players engaged. All along the galaxy and the universe, you had aliens playing that game. That's how successful that game was. Well, then come to find out that Ubisoft, according to their latest earnings call, lost almost 2 billion euro. 2 billion euro with a B, right? So in order to lose that amount of money, does that mean that all your games are a failure? No. But does that mean that all your games were a success? No. But what is more likely is that pretty much every single one of the video games that you released recently have either undersold or completely just utterly flopped, which I think is more likely the case here. Now, I think out of all the video games they released recently, like Skull and Bones, Star Wars Outlaws, right? Even the Rayman game and the Prince of Persia game, out of all these video games, Assassin's Creed Shadows definitely did better than all of them. But it's still not enough. The problem is that Assassin's Creed Shadows didn't do as well as Valhalla, so that means that the franchise went down as a result. So even though it did better than the other failure games, it's still technically a flop in the grand scheme of things because it's not continuing the franchise in any positive way whatsoever. And if anything, it's making the franchise get worse, at least from a sales perspective, right? So I looked at this and I'm like, this sounds really familiar. I almost remember a word-for-word statement from Ubisoft saying the same exact thing. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. You have an article here from Tweaktown, and there was multiple websites that said this, by the way, posted all the way back in February 14th of 2025. Assassin's Creed Shadows shows early signs of success. Despite controversy, refunds, and a full-on delay out of the holiday season, Ubisoft says that Assassin's Creed Shadows shows signs of pre-order success. Right? I'm almost positive they did the same thing with Star Wars Outlaws as well, but I couldn't find one for that, so I'm not going to say that like definitively. But I do remember them definitively saying that about Shadows, and we all know how that ended, right? Ubisoft went on like a months-long campaign, a social media campaign, where they spent all this time trying to convince everybody that Shadows was a major win, right? They tried to convince everybody that Shadows was the, number one game. It owned the chuds, all that stuff. You had the Assassin's Creed Shadows main account, or the Assassin's Creed main account, quote tweeting the chuds, right? Basically trying to ratio them or own them, right? Like they basically ended up ratioing Grums, if I'm not mistaken, pretty fucking hard. Now, granted, he kind of deserved it because it's kind of funny, but still, ultimately, like you could tell that the perception of success was more important to them than actual success. They wanted everybody to believe that they were a massive success. So they were report every like, what was it? Every 24 hours, 48 hours, they were reporting about 1 million players engaged, 2 million players engaged, 3 million players engaged, right? But nobody wanted to talk sales. Nobody. And the moment you wanted to talk about sales, you were accused of being a chud, a racist, or whatever. You were accused of not wanting to talk about the game itself, that you just want to hate on. You were accused of everything. Mind you, I think I'm still one of the only YouTubers, including the fucking shills, that got the game for free. I'm one of the only YouTubers out there that lasted more than a fucking day playing this game, let alone beat the game, and reviewed it for everybody to see on my channel, on my gaming channel. So I don't want to hear that shit, right? I don't want to hear that shit. It's always like, oh, you can't talk about the game until you buy it. And then you get the game and they're like, well, you only bought the game because you wanted to make content. Like, brother, stop moving the fucking goalposts. Stop bullshitting yourself and everybody around you. Stop it. Nobody believes you. So anyway, they said this all the way back in February 2025. So that's why when I saw this post and I'm like, oh, that sounds really familiar. Gee, I wonder why they're saying this. And it's because they usually utilize their biggest franchise that they know they're actually going to have the most pre-orders for to try to push this narrative that Ubisoft is actually doing perfectly fine. So this is where we start getting into the truth, right? They tried to tell you that Ubisoft was doing fine. The shill said that Ubisoft was fine, that Tencent saved their life, that the Chuds got owned, that the Chuds lost, and all that stuff. Meanwhile, Star Wars Outlaws got completely felted. They even had to admit that it's not selling well whatsoever, that the poor sales came regardless of whether or not the shills gave them good ratings, and none of that actually mattered in the grand scheme of things, right? They're also trying to convince you that Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Ghost Recon are going to be having a return to higher quality standards over the next 3 years, whatever the fuck that means. Because keep in mind, guys, when it comes to Ubisoft video games, it's not just about the modern audience bullshit, right? Because that's definitely there, okay? Like, there's no doubt about it. The modern audience bullshit is there. It's prevalent. It's Ubisoft. This is what they believe in. This is what they do every day. However, it goes well past that. Ubisoft's problems and the reason why they're losing so much money goes well past the modern audience bullshit and goes into just straight up negligence, where they're just so bad at all the business decisions that they've made over the last few years, their investments that they've made, and the kind of video games that they've decided to invest in. And then on top of that, too, after investing in those video games, they end up making these games the complete opposite of what everybody else wants. Right? Assassin's Creed Shadows was the literal opposite of what people had in their mind when somebody told them, hey, what do you think an Assassin's Creed game in Japan would look like? Or Skull and Bones, for example. Everybody had in their mind that we'll be playing like an Assassin's Creed Black Flag online video game, and we got something completely opposite of that. Right? So they keep giving us the exact opposite of what people actually want, and then what are you, shocked that they're losing so much money? Not only that, Yves, the CEO of the company, him and his family, I understand, like, this is their baby. I get that. But it becomes a point where you should probably step away. You should probably walk away. I think that they are the worst for the company. Him, his son that he put into power, they are the worst. They were doing deals with Tencent that was going to guarantee them that they stay in power. That was the thing they cared about the most. Not about doing better by shareholders, not about doing better by, their employees or whatever. They wanted to stay in power. That was the one thing that they cared about. Right? So, with all this being said, eventually what happens is the truth comes out because they are a public company. And public companies can run these social media campaigns, they can do all this bullshit. But if these games aren't selling, if the company's not making money, you're going to find out. It's only a matter of time. And that's what we have here. Ubisoft has announced a record-setting 1.3 billion euro operating loss for its fiscal year ending March of 2026. Their net bookings dropped a total of 17.4% to 1.53 billion euro, impacted by underwhelming game launches and development delays. In response, the company implemented cost-cutting measures, including the reduction of 1,200 jobs and 118 million euro in fixed costs. Ubisoft predicts an 8 to 9% decline in sales and a high single-digit loss margin for the 26 to 27 fiscal year. So even with all of these video games that they have planned, they're still expecting to decline another 8 to 9%. They're still expecting to lose almost 10% in sales still for the upcoming fiscal year. But they anticipate returning to profit and generating positive cash flow by 27 to 28. Well, that's when they release their other video games, right? They're hoping that Black Flag saves their asses. They're hoping that their other video games that they're working on saves their asses. But that would have to, these games would have to be massive successes for it to actually work. And even if it did, Even if, like, let's say Black Flag. Sorry, hold on. Had to cough. Even if they, okay, let's say that Black Flag actually sold an ungodly amount of copies. That's still not going to get them anywhere close to getting out the hole. They put themselves in such a massive hole that it would be impossible for one or two video games to save them out of that hole. This is going to take multiple strong hitting video games on multiple different fronts for them to come anywhere close to getting out of the hole, because they've lost so much money and now they're in debt to Tencent. It's just not looking good. It's just not looking good. So at this point, even if the games are good, you're going to have one win surrounded by multiple losses, 10, 20 plus losses over the last decade or so. You're going to have all of these major losses, with some of them being some of the biggest in gaming history, like Skull and Bones, for example. Skull and Bones still, to this day, people don't talk about how that game lost more money than Concord. How is that fucking possible? And it's because they started it off as a Black Flag online video game and a sequel, and they turned it into its own game, hoping that they can monetize it. And they ended up having to redevelop the game multiple times, release the game, completely failed, wasted hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have nothing to show for it. And now they're hoping that Black Flag Resynced, which is being made by the same team that made Skull and Bones, they're hoping that that game is going to save them from their mistakes with Skull and Bones. That's what they're hoping for. Now, whether or not that actually happens, I don't know about that. But that's what they're hoping for, right? So ultimately, guys, I just think that I'll never forget this. Bro, this picture of Yasuke is crazy. The fact that Ubisoft developers utilize Yasuke as a means to talk to the player in the most homosexual ways possible was crazy, bro. It was crazy. This was when Yasuke was looking at the camera and breaking the wall to the player, knowing that he was about to smash some man cheeks. That's how crazy this game was, bro. This is Yasuke getting ready to smash some man cheeks or some non-binary cheeks. I think this was the cutscene where he was meeting up with the non-binary fucking character that was in the game. And he's like, yup, you already know what I'm about to do. It's crazy, dude. But this is Ubisoft, and listen, at the end of the day, I can't say that they don't deserve it, realistically. And again, it's not, I already know people could be like, oh, you just hate it because you think it's woke. I don't give a fuck about that. What I'm telling you is that from a business perspective and from a satisfying gamer's perspective, this company has been doing anything but that. This company has been trying their best to do the complete opposite of that and thinking that they're going to continue to be successful because of their lineage as Ubisoft. Your lineage doesn't mean a fucking thing anymore. Ubisoft as a name means almost as much as Bungie as a name. And we already know how that's going. So these companies, they were relying on their lineage. You can't do that anymore. You got to put up or shut up. There's too many video games out there for people to be nostalgia baiting and hoping that it's going to work. It's not going to work. I'm sorry. Not anymore. So that's basically it for good old Ubisoft. Get felted, Ubisoft. That's what it is, man.